On this day, December 21st, 2021, 12/21/21, I will be revealing I will be speaking from the depths, if I can. If I can. That's what I'm trying to do here. Speaking about things that I don't really know. Things that are somewhere in some inarticulated space that I'm going to try to articulate. So, yesterday, I watched Louis C.K.'s new stand-up special titled Sorry. I only learned yesterday that it existed. He released it some number of days ago, but since he has been deplatformed, or whatever you want to call it, he didn't get released on Netflix or anything. He didn't get released on a platform. He just released it on his website, louisck.com. And in my opinion, it is worth the $10. I recommend it. But I'm biased. I was already a Louis fan. And I'm already a stand-up comedy fan, so to me that's $10 well spent. I'll probably watch it again. I thought it was good. I think Louis C.K. is as good as ever. I believe he is one of the best to hold a microphone. He's at the top of the craft still. And I would bet that this new special will, in some ways, relaunch his career. It seems to me that his career wasn't truly affected by the Me Too movement. It was just redirected, right? It was just, in my opinion, and this is where I'm starting today's video, before I jump into heaven and hell, God, the devil, before I talk about form and content and the interrelationships and speculation on my own life, I need to start with this idea here that Louis C.K. was one of the most unfairly canceled people. He was swept up in the feminist hurricane known as the Me Too movement, and I have spent years of my life defending him. Every time his name would come up in a room, I would always defend his name. Always. And I have to tell you, it's easier to be an atheist in a room of Christians than it is to be somebody who defends Louis C.K. in a room of feminists. Feminists are fucking annoying. So here we go. Here's what I think. Here's what I think. Here's what I think. I will say, if you watch his set, if you watch Sorry, the new set that he did, the new special, he starts off immediately by talking about pedophilia. It is the first subject that he dives into. And as I've said in the past, I believe a comedian's job is to tell the truth. And I believe the best comedians tell the truth the best. That's what their skill really is. They pull things out of the darkness and they show it to everybody else. That's what a comedian does. And if you watch Louis C.K. and similar comedians, because it's not always just about telling the truth, but if you watch Louis C.K., you'll notice that what he does is he plays around with the truth. He'll tell you something true, and then he'll tell you something as if it's true, right? He does this thing where he'll give you an expectation that he's going to say something true, and he'll say something obviously not true, and he plays around with your expectations. He's subverting your expectations. So you don't know whether what he's going to say next is true or not. But when he does say something true, you know that he knows that you know that it's something true. He knows that he's pulled something out of the darkness. Because if you think about what a comedian is symbolically, it's somebody who stands up on a stage and pays attention to the world, right? We all sit in a room as a group paying attention to this guy who is standing on a stage paying attention to the world. And what they do is they look around at the world, the same world that we're in. Everybody's in the same world here. They find concepts and they articulate them. They bring them out of the darkness and they put them in front of all of us. And when they say something true and they say it correctly, we laugh. You can't control it. This is important. This is important. You cannot control it. You experience it. They're giving you something that you're experiencing. And this is an arguable point, I know, but truly, you can't stop yourself from laughing as long as you're paying attention. As long as you're not focused on not listening or something, right? You can't close your ears, but you can focus on not listening to what Louis is saying. But if you're in that room with the comedian and he says something, you will laugh. So will the whole crowd. And it's a form of worship. It's a collective reverence for whatever this man is saying on stage. We laugh together as a group because this guy is articulating something. So he starts off with pedophilia, and I'm going to come back to that. First, I need to talk about the feminists. I need to talk about that which cancels. That which cancels. Louis was canceled by the feminists, or by that which cancels. So, what is that which cancels? What is that? Who cancels? What is the system that cancels? What do you call that? And so, I'm going to talk about a pattern, a couple patterns here. I'm just going to start listing up patterns and then I'm going to see what happens. I'm going to see what happens here. I'm going to try and maybe put them all together if I can. So, what do feminists talk about? What do feminists talk about? They talk about feminism. And what's feminism? Feminism is truly about the relationship between men and women. If all the men disappeared, if I snapped my fingers and all the men went away, there would be no more feminism, because then it'd just be women, and what are they going to be arguing about? What's the patriarchy? What are they doing? Now they're just people, right? There is no feminism without men. Feminism is about the relationship between women and men. You'll notice feminism affects 50% of the population. It's about, I mean, technically it's about 100% of the population, but really, the group for which feminism advocates is for 50% of the human population. So, keep that in mind, 50-50, all right? Keep that in mind, 50-50. Also, feminism started back late 1800s, early 1900s, started a long time ago. I'm talking about chronology, and I'm talking about population ratios here. So, I see a stack of ideas. You can call it a stack. You might be able to call it something else. I'll get there. To me, I see a stack of ideas, and feminism is at the bottom of the stack. Feminism is at the bottom here. So it is the first layers, layer 1. So layer 2, and I promise I'm getting somewhere with this. It's gonna sound, well, it sounds crazy even to me, so here we go. Layer 2. What is another thing that cancels? What is another force that cancels? How about issues of race, racial issues, racism, racial relations? There's a force that cancels over these subjects. In the same way that there's a force that cancels using feminism, like the Me Too movement, there's a force that cancels through racial ideas. I hope you can't hear that train in the background. I hate that train sometimes. Why do they gotta be honking their horn so much? Anyway, race. Second layer. Again, population ratio. Not 50-50, it's more like 75-25, right? You'll notice that with feminism, it's about men versus women. With race, it's about white versus not white. That's generally the setup. And so, notice an interesting pattern here. The bad guy on the second layer is white. The bad guy on the first layer is man. White, man. Layer 2, white. Layer 1, man. So, second layer, racial issues. Ratio, smaller ratio than male to female, but still probably about 25%, at least in the US. at least in the US. But it's generally majority minority. That's kind of how I see it. And chronologically, when did racial issues come to the front of our culture? Was it before or after feminism? We could argue about that, but I will claim that feminism preceded much of the racial cultural progress that we've been making, right? I'm drawing vague timelines here. There are overlaps. It's hard to say which one came first, feminism or, civil rights or racial equality, but arguably feminism was first. So, what's layer 3? What's layer 3? Layer 3 is the gay layer, the LGB layer, lesbians, gays, bisexuals, the sexual orientation layer. So, ratio-wise, about 10 to 15%, right? Something like 10% of the population is gay or not straight. You'll notice, again, the bad guy. Who's the bad guy here? Straight. So, layer 3, straight. Layer 2, white. Layer 1, man. Chronologically, how does this work? Well, when did the gay movement come to the front of the cultural brain of humanity? Of Western culture, at least. Well, I think after feminism and after civil rights. Chronologically, it's feminism, civil rights, and then gay and gay marriage, gay pride, whatever you want to call it. Equal treatment, something like that. So chronologically, that's the order. Ratio-wise, they get smaller every step here. There are fewer gay people in the population than there are racial minorities than there are women. So it's like 50, 25, 10, right? So what's the fourth layer? The fourth layer is transgender, gender fluid, gender swapping, gender non-conforming. The fourth layer is gender identity. Gender identity. Again, chronologically, started in like 2015, right? That's when the trans idea, the trans concept really came to the forefront of the brain that is our society. Chronologically. And then population ratio, it's like what, 2%, 1%? 1 out of 100? So, those are the 4 layers. That's the stack. You could call it a pyramid because each layer includes fewer people as you go up. We've been building this pyramid for about 120 years, it seems. Maybe longer. And yes, the chronology is vague. The population ratio is just an observation. That's just a number, right? Could just be purely coincidental. But that is not what I see. That is not what I see. It's about 35 degrees outside right now. Forgive the sniffling. So we have this stack. We have this stack. This pyramid, you might call it. These are simply just patterns, right? Chronologically, population size. These are just 2 unrelated patterns, right? Unrelated patterns. This can't possibly mean anything, what I'm saying. But you'll notice something. You'll notice something here. Dave Chappelle, one of the highest paid comedians of all time, arguably one of the greatest comedians of all time, dedicated at least 50% of his content in his most recent special. I'm gonna wait for this plane to fly overhead. Can you see it? Dave Chappelle released an hour of content recently, his most recent special. No less than 50% of that hour was dedicated specifically to the topic of transgender. He was talking specifically about the 4th layer of the stack here. So, if you were to go to any point in history and find the most contentious political issue at the time, it will be one of the layers of this stack. At least, well, let me rephrase that a little bit because that's not entirely right. What's clear to me right now is that the hottest issue, the hottest layer here, is over this transgender issue here. And you'll notice that a comedian's job, like I've said in the past, is to release tension, release cultural tension, right? So we all get in a room, we listen to the guy telling the truth. He tells us the truth and it releases the emotional buildup that's there. So there's been a lot of emotional buildup over the transgender issue. Dave Chappelle goes up there and he releases some of that pressure. So it helps us digest ideas that we kind of understand, don't quite understand, and he helps us move through those ideas. That's how I see it. And you'll notice what's interesting here is that which cancels tried to cancel Dave Chappelle, right? Tried to cancel Dave Chappelle. They didn't want him to talk about what he's talking about. And I think what's interesting here is, what about that which builds the stack? Who has been building the stack for these past 150 years or whatever it is? Who are the feminists? Who are the civil rights activists? Who are the LGBT activists? Who are these people? Who are the people that build the stack? Who are they? And who is canceling? What is the relationship between that which cancels and that which builds the stack? And why does it seem, why did that which cancels aim its sights at Dave Chappelle? Why? Why? Would most people agree that this stack is good? That this stack of ideas that has been built for 120 years is good? Is it truly a stack? Does one have to rest on the other, on the previous one? Was there a reason it happened in this chronology? I think yes. Yes, I think yes, there is a reason. And I think what's happening here, and so what I'm discussing here is my own model of the world, of society, right? And the problem with modeling society is that, I mean, the only thing more complicated than a human brain, really, is a collection of 7 billion human brains. So to understand oneself is difficult enough. To understand ourselves borders on impossible, right? Arguably completely impossible. But the best artists, the best comedians, the best artists, the best thinkers are the ones who can put their finger on the pulse, right? The ones who can see the patterns, the ones that can see society as if it is a symphony, and they can predict where the symphony will go next. They understand the pattern that's there. They can look at the world of complexity. They can see patterns. They can articulate those patterns, and then they can use those patterns to predict the future. But the problem is that it's so complex that oftentimes the only way to articulate these ideas is, you know, this is not math, right? I can't mathematically predict the future. Not yet, not yet. So, I think Dave Chappelle dedicated 50% of his stand-up content to the transgender issue because Dave Chappelle has his finger on the pulse. The transgender issue is the hot topic right now. It is what people want to laugh about. It's what people want to hear about for a reason, right? He dedicated his set to that for a reason. So, there's a fifth layer. There's a fifth layer. We have yet to reach the fifth layer. You might have thought that in this pyramid we've been building that the capstone was the transgenders. This is not true. This is not true. There is an even smaller subsection of the population, I believe smaller, than transgender, because transgender is arguably about 2%. Depends. I mean, some people are going to say it's way more, some will say it's way less, but it's a smaller number than gay, much smaller than race, much smaller than feminism, than women, I mean. But the fifth layer The fifth layer is pedophilia. The fifth layer is MAPS, pedophiles, minor attracted persons. That is the fifth layer. You might be able to see it now, that there are people out there destigmatizing and normalizing pedophilia. And like Dave Chappelle, with his finger on the pulse of society, talking about trans, Louis C.K. has his finger on the pulse as well, and he's talking about pedophiles. He spends at least the first 10 minutes of his set. It's not half of set, but there's a substantial amount of time dedicated specifically to talking about pedophiles. So, that's the fifth layer. That's what's coming. It's what's happening now. That's where we're headed. You should already see it. I see it happening. I don't know who else can see it happening, but I see it happening. Louis C.K. makes an excellent point at the beginning of his set. And I think that what is happening here, I believe what is happening based on my understanding of the world, and I'm about to make some predictions, right? I can't prove I'm not insane unless I make predictions that are accurate. The only way to prove that you understand what's going on is to make predictions that tell the future. If you can tell the future, you must have known something, right? Otherwise, I'm just crazy. So, here's what I think. I think the TERFs are right. I think the TERFs are ahead of the curve. I think the TERFs are actually the beginning of one of the biggest shifts in human thinking, in societal thinking. The TERFs are blazing the trail. They are way ahead of the curve, and they don't seem to entirely understand why. So, like I said, we're heading towards MAPS. We're heading towards this world where they're going to destigmatize and normalize pedophilia. Louis C.K. says in the beginning of his set, pedophiles will always exist. Pedophiles will always exist, and he's right. He's right. So, pedophiles will have to be part of the thought process no matter what, right? They're going to have to be answered in some way. There's going to be an answer. Whether you call them a problem or not is part of the answer, part of the thought process, right? The way it stands right now, the way that our culture's headed right now, that which builds the stack, that which cancels, whatever that is currently headed in a direction where it will... Something's going to happen with MAPS, right? This concept of MAPS wouldn't even be a term that I know if not for that which builds the stack, if not for that which cancels. So, we're at an interesting boiling point here, an interesting turning point. An interesting turning point because the TERFs exist. The TERFs have made a decision. They have made a decision that has ramifications across the entire thought process here. And I've talked about this in episode 17. They have decided that trans women are not women. That is what TERFs have decided. This statement, trans women are women, this statement, if you just take it and answer it true or false, it's like flipping a switch that has ramifications across entire systems. If it affects feminism, racism, LGBT, it affects the T, obviously, and it will have effects on MAPS. It will have effects on the fifth layer. And so I believe what's happening here, right? It's like a programming language. If you were to change the value of a variable in a programming language, it will have ramifications across all of the operations of that language. We're seeing something exactly the same with trans women or women. Whether you answer that true or false will have ramifications across the entire language. And so, that's why there's so much heat over it. I don't think any one person is aware of why there's heat over it. I believe, and this is going to make me sound a little bit like that which builds the stack, but I believe there's some sort of systemic knowledge of this, and there's a systemic pushback. The reason that you see so much heat, so much intensity, cultural intensity over this concept of trans women are women. If you tweet out trans women are not women, if you say those words out loud, that which cancels will cancel you. Just for saying trans women are not women. It is one of the most contentious things you can possibly say today. And the people who do the canceling will tell you that it's about, they'll have reasons, right? They'll tell you reasons. I think that truly the reason that it's so contentious is because that this is a true or false statement that has effects across an entire set of ideas. I don't think any one person realizes it. I think they'll tell you that you'll often see that it's about compassion for the marginalized, which is something I'll get to, because who uses compassion? Who? Who uses compassion? Let's talk about this true and false statement. So if you answer the statement true, it means one thing, and if you answer it false, it means another thing. So let's talk about the ramifications. How does this affect the entire stack? I believe it affects the entire stack. Flipping this switch is like changing a variable in a programming language. Like I said, this affects all of those layers I'm talking about, and so I'm going to go through that if I can. This is where I normally get stuck. But I think I can do it today. I think I can do it. So, here's why the TERFs are right. Because they have decided to be trans exclusionary. They've decided to say that trans women are not women. This has ramifications that they don't understand. So, there's a game called the Tower of Hanoi. It's kind of a game. It's a game you give little kids, funny enough. It's like they make little Fisher-Price toys out of it, but it's one of those games where you have a board with 3 pegs on it, and then there's rings like donuts that you stack onto the pegs. There's 3 pegs, and the rings are all different sizes, and you give this to little kids, but there's actually a math game you can do. This is like a programming challenge that they'll give to coders. It turns out you can solve the problem given any number of rings, which is interesting. So the idea is that you have to move the tower from one peg to another. And the layers on top can't move until the layer on the bottom. The layer on the bottom can't move until the layers on top move. And a smaller layer cannot be placed on a layer smaller than itself. So like feminism, race, gay, T, right? These 4 layers I'm talking about. Each layer must be placed on a layer bigger. So what I see happening today it reminds me of the Tower of Hanoi, because what needs to happen is that the bottom layer needs to move. And I think the TERFs are doing that. I think the TERFs are moving the bottom layer. The problem is that all the layers on top have to be taken off first before they can move. And they need to be placed back on once feminism moves over. So there's a big shift in feminism happening, and it starts with saying trans women are not women. So that's the top layer. The bottom layer is saying, all right, look, top layer, you got to get off so that we can move all the other layers right now. And so this is the shift that's happening. And the way that I will articulate the idea that the TERFs are onto is this. It's a recognition of humanity. A recognition of humanity. It's an understanding of ourselves. Understanding of me, an understanding of you, an understanding of us on all levels here. Me and you, our community, our society, our population, the entire human race. It's an understanding of us, a recognition of humanity that is happening currently, and the TERFs are ahead of the curve. So what they have recognized is that men can actually not be women, because it turns out men and women are built differently. And what's interesting here, the way that this affects feminism, men and women are built differently, right? So this feminist idea that men and women should be represented equally in all institutions is actually anti-human. It's actually anti-biological, but it's truly anti-human. Men and women are built differently. This is what the TERFs have recognized. Since men and women are built differently, they have slightly different interests. Those interests are going to result in men and women being represented non-equally in various institutions. The TERFs can see this. And so, who is the bad guy to feminism? It's patriarchy. It's men, the patriarchy, right? The way you define patriarchy matters. I believe there's a patriarchy. I believe the patriarchy is real, but it depends on how you define it. It depends on how you define it. I think the TERF's definition is going to have to be, it's going to have to include a recognition of the humanity, include a recognition that men and women are truly built differently. This is something that the trans can't seem to recognize, but the TERFs seem to recognize it. So I'm not saying that the patriarchy doesn't exist, but I'm saying that the idea that the 50-50 representation must happen is anti-human. So the feminist movement is going to have to shift. They're going to have to shift. The TERFs are pulling them in that direction. Recognition of humanity. That's the pulling force, I think. That's how I see it. That's how I see it. And so let's go up the stack. Let's just go up the stack and I'll tell you how this affects everything. And again, this is where I usually get stuck. How does this affect race? How does trans women or not women affect race, right? How does that affect racial issues? The second layer of the stack here. Well, maybe we have to realize that we're just people. Maybe we have to realize that we are all just humans. This whole black and white, all these non-white, non-black racial things, we're all just human beings. And it turns out, yes, different populations of human beings have lived in different environments, in different places. It turns out that humanity has been changing over time. Humanity's been evolving. That's why we look different. There needs to be a recognition of the humanity. And here's what is the scary thing. And here's why I think there's so much kickback here. I think that there's an ideological, systemic, like the ideology possesses the people, right? The idea has us. It's not the other way around. It's not that we have ideas. The idea has us. And so there's something worrying, something scary that I don't think people are ready to see. They're not ready to recognize it yet. It's there in the darkness. It's there in the darkness, and somebody needs to pull it out into the light. And here's the problem. We are biologically, part of human nature, biologically programmed to engage in a race war. We are programmed to team up with people that look like us and attack people that don't look like us. This is part of human nature. It's built into us. There are genes that encode for this. We need to recognize this. We need to recognize it. We need to tell the truth about it. Racism is part of human nature. Human babies are born this way. There's no getting away from it. We can lie about it. It's not going to help. We need to tell the truth. We need to recognize within us these things. We need to recognize the humanity in ourselves and in others. We need to use this to understand ourselves, right? So, this instantly gets into this problem of where is the evil? Where is the evil then, right? If we're recognizing that there's this human nature almost has an inherent proclivity towards racism, because we recognize patterns as animals. We are pattern recognizing animals, and we recognize what we look like and what others look like. And we have truly, we are programmed to engage in racial conflict. Truly. It's there. If you don't believe that, then you are not recognizing your own humanity. You are not telling yourself the truth. Most people don't recognize this, and it's causing us problems. And again, trans women are not women is the same thing here. It's a denial of humanity. It's a denial of the biology, right? The reality. It's a denial of us. It's not understanding ourselves. And so yeah, if we're telling the truth, then where is the evil? If this is something human babies are born with, then what is evil here? What is evil? How come currently the evil is just white people, or just a subcategory of white people? Like, that's where the evil is, right? We're gonna have to have a conversation about this. Where is the evil exactly? when it comes to layer 3 here. Who is the bad guy? Because currently the bad guy is the white people, right? White man. Layer 3. White. White. So a lot of this is going to be, you know, these are very hard conversations because I'm changing where the evil is. I told you with layer 1 here, did I mess up the numbers? Layer 1 is the feminist layer, right? The bad guy's the patriarchy. And I told you, yeah, the patriarchy's real, but it's not evil. It's just part of humanity. Layer 2, racism. Yeah, racism's real, but it's part of humanity. It's not evil. We're going to have to talk about it. We're going to have to recognize it. So layer 3, the gay layer, the LGBT layer, homosexuality. Pride is going to have to stop. Pride is going to have to stop. You're not special. You're not different. You have to, something my brother always says is the gays stole the rainbow. Why do the homosexuals have the rainbow? Why did they get the rainbow? The rainbow's a beautiful thing. It belongs to everybody. It belongs to humans. So pride needs to stop. You're not special. You're not different. Act like a human. Don't act like something else. You're a human. Okay? Whatever it is that you're doing, whatever it is that you're feeling, experiencing, is a human experience. Recognize it, and just be a human. Pride is over. Pride is done. Once this feminist movement shifts the block over here, once the feminist thing picks up its layer and moves it over, pride is over. Pride is done for. No more pride. None of it. No more specialness, right? There is no category you can draw here. You're just a human being. It's done. It's over. That's where we need to go. We need to recognize the humanity. It turns out, you know, these are conversations that need to happen. It turns out that homosexuality is a human experience. It turns out that this is, you know, I told you that I often get stuck talking about these things because there's just, where is the evil, right? Where is the evil here? Who is the bad guy? Who is the bad guy? What is evil? Who's the bad guy? Why can't we just talk about it and tell the truth about it? And I think part of the reason is because we just have this anti-human thing going on here. It's this, to say trans women are women is to deny humanity. It is to lie at the deepest level. Deepest level. And like I said, it has ramifications all the way down the stack. The TERFs are ahead of the curve. They're pulling the bottom block. All the other blocks are going to have to get up and move. The feminists are going to pull the block over, and then the other blocks can stack back on top again if they want, right? I think after this point, I think after the TERF movement, I think, because like I said, the TERFs are ahead of the curve, and eventually we're not even going to call them TERFs anymore. These people with these ideas are simply ahead of the curve, and that this idea set will move this entire tower, almost erase the whole tower, because that which cancels will be gone. The stack won't even need to be there anymore. That, like, the forces that cancel will be in a post-woke age. Post-woke, truly. It's funny that we call it woke, because really what we need is an awakening from woke. What we need is the woke state of mind. We need to get past the woke state of mind. There needs to be the post-woke state of mind. And we will achieve it. And the TERFs are bringing us there. They are. That's how I see this. That's how I see all of this. And then so, yeah, and when you get up to the third layer, it gets harder to talk about. But there are really things that we need to, you know, this isn't, this comes back to compassion. And I think actually what's funny is that a lot of the rhetoric around all of these things, around women, racial minorities, homosexuality, and transgender, and even at this point maps to a certain point, or it will be, it's all built on compassion. And I think it's a fake kind of compassion. It's like a lie. This compassion is a lie because it's disguised as compassion, but I think the ideology is not compassionate. But the people who wield it are either truly feeling compassion in that moment or faking it in order to disguise their behavior, right? There's something going on here where somebody will come forward to defend a racial minority or defend a sexual minority or whatever, and they will do it under the guise of compassion, but really they're doing it to gain attention for themselves. They're doing it to acquire power for themselves, really just to gain attention. And I talked about this in another place, but you'll notice the bottom layer is feminism, and you'll notice that women are more likely to do this than men. And I'm sorry, women. I'm sorry out there, women out there who might be upset at me for saying that, but it seems to me that it's more likely that women will use compassion as a way to gain attention for themselves. If somebody is injured or hurt or feeling bad or whatever, the person that's most likely to step forward is a woman. And you can ask yourself the question, is she compassionate towards this person, or is she displaying compassion towards this person as a way to grab attention for herself? Like, who is it really about? Who is it really about? And so, yeah, there's a reason feminism is the bottom layer here. There's a reason feminism had to come first. Women needed to gain a political voice. There needed to be, I mean, you can't tell me that the women gaining a political voice didn't have an effect, right? It surely had an effect. Definitely. It changed our political landscape when women acquired a political voice. And these other pieces fell into place after that. The racial pieces, and then the gay pieces, and then the trans pieces all fell into place after that. Largely, I think you can point to compassion as why this happened. And I'm not saying compassion is a bad thing. I'm not saying, well, here's where I'm getting at here, here's what I'm getting at. We're headed towards this fifth layer, right? We're headed towards this fifth layer. And you can ask yourself, is it a good thing? Is it a good thing that we add on this fifth layer? And if your answer is no, which I think a lot of people's answers will be no, then you have to ask yourself, was it a good thing that we added the fourth layer, and the third layer, and the second layer, and the first layer? What if all these ideas are wrong? What if all these layers are bad? You know, and what if we only realized it once we hit the fourth layer? What if we are kind of realizing it at the fourth layer with this whole trans women or women variable switching on or off, having such heat over it? Maybe that didn't get us to realize it. Maybe the fifth layer will get us to realize that we truly have made a mistake at the deepest level here. And I think, the way I see it, like I said, I have to make predictions just to prove I'm not crazy. I think the TERFs are ahead of the curve. That's my basest of predictions here, is that everybody else is going to catch up to the TERFs. Everybody else. And this is going to result in a gigantic shift in the feminist movement, which will result in a shift in the rhetoric around race and racism. We are going to enter a place where I thought we were when I was younger, which was kind of the post-racial era, right? I thought we were there, and suddenly we're not again. So, to me, that comes next. And then after that, pride will stop. The pride flag will stop being cool, first of all. Nobody will care anymore. It'll just be a thing. It won't even be a thing. It won't be what it is now. It will change. And then after that, the trans layer will change as well. And then how we deal with pedophiles, I think, again, Louis C.K. put his finger right on it. The problem here is that pedophiles will always exist. They will always exist. They will always be there. Every generation produces new pedophiles. There's no getting out of it, it seems. So there needs to be, I think it's funny that Louis is actually ahead of the curve on this one, a recognition of humanity here. That pedophiles are human beings. Whatever they're experiencing is a human experience. And you have to ask yourself again, where is the evil? Who is the bad guy? Who is the bad guy here, right? So, that was 45 minutes of that. This is something I think about a lot. I sort of model it as these layers. I sort of see a fifth layer, and you can easily sit here and argue that framing it as like this pyramid, framing it as this like stack, doesn't really make sense in a lot of ways, and I think that's completely true. I mean, what I'm talking about here is the most complex system we know of, which is us, you know, ourselves. And I think what's happening here is that the human race needs to, should, wants to, I don't know what you call it, but what we need is a deeper understanding of ourselves. That means us individually and us as a society, historically as well. We need to have a better understanding of ourselves historically. But also individually, like consciously. We need a better understanding of our own minds. And I think all these things are kind of happening And like I said, there's a reason that this trans women or women thing is so tense, so intense. And there's a reason that the TERFs are causing such a problem. And it's because this entire system, this whole ideological set, they're all connected and they're all being moved around. And again, it's like the Tower of Hanoi, really. It's like we just need to have a moment where, like, what has happened is all these pieces have finally been stacked onto the second peg. And I think what's happening is, like, maybe there's a layer even underneath feminism. There's like a bigger ring underneath all of it that has moved or will move. And then the feminists will catch up. And it's all overlapping, right? It's not like dominoes. It's not dominoes. And it doesn't work exactly like the Tower of Hanoi. Because these are vague things here. These are ideas that I'm talking about, moving around in the brains of the humans. And if you model the entire human race as one collective mind, in a way, then you can see that the collective mind is trying to understand itself. And these ideas are sort of just moving their way through. They're just kind of like moving their way through the digestive tract of the mind. I don't know what you call it. And like I said, the TERFs are 100% ahead of the curve. They are way ahead of the curve. And they're moving the entire feminist movement, which again drags all the other pieces along with it. So yeah, and again, it's a recognition of humanity. I really think that's at the core of it. It's like an understanding of ourselves. So I know that I've repeated that many times, but this is like I said, these are things that are outside of my articulated knowledge. These are things that I don't quite understand. I'm grasping in this video. This is me grasping. Like you could almost say it's like I'm in a semi-aware, semi-conscious argument here, right? Some of it is not really based on things that I could write down or things that I can explain to you in a way that will make sense for sure. A lot of the things I said in this video might have made no sense. It might have just sounded conspiratorial, right? This might have just sounded like a gigantic conspiracy theory. But really the way I see it is there's this chronological buildup of ideas over time, over like a century, more than a century. And when you have a gigantic ideological buildup like this, little things can have gigantic effects. And this trans women are women being true or false is one of those things. It's a variable. It's like a little switch that might look innocuous. It might look like it's not relevant in many ways, but it has ramifications that go down the entire stack. And that's why you see things like what happened over the Dave Chappelle Netflix special. There were protests. There's a lot of articles and there's a lot of heat about it. And, you know, it's funny to me. It's interesting to point out that which cancels is also that which builds the stack. So, and these comedians they're like weather vanes, you know? They're weather vanes. They can feel the consciousness of the human race in some way. They can see it, and then they can articulate it forward to us. And Louis C.K. did it. He has his finger right on the pedophile button. Right on that little strain of thoughts that's related to pedophilia, which is something that we haven't dealt with yet. We really haven't. And he points that out in his sketch, in his set. We haven't dealt with it. We haven't really faced the truth of it. We haven't recognized the humanity of pedophiles, which is, you know, it's even something that's hard for me to say. It's hard to tell the truth about these things. It's really hard. A lot of the times, I mean, if you think about it, when you're talking about only yourself, a lot of the times, the things that will cause you the most pain are the things that are true that you haven't really admitted to yourself, right? Painful things that you need to admit to yourself. And that applies on the level of an individual, but it also applies as a society, as a collective. As a collective, we need to admit things to ourselves. You know, we need to admit that, yeah, men and women are actually built differently, and maybe the patriarchy is completely biological. Maybe the patriarchy is there because that's how humans are. Maybe that's just how human animals set up their societies, and to ask that to change is to tell lies. You're basically forcing people into positions where they must tell lies. You know, I've said this in other videos, but to what extent can we change the structure without becoming anti-human? That's really the question. And it's funny that the feminist movement is where these ideas are being asked now. That's where these ideas are being turned around. The feminists have created a sub-movement called the TERFs. They have decided that trans women are not women, and in doing so, they have recognized the humanity. They've recognized that men cannot become women. Men can do all sorts of things, but they cannot literally become women. That is impossible. And to say otherwise is to lie. And once you tell that truth, you have to recognize that our structures, our patriarchy might exist because men are built differently than women. And then, like I said, you go up the layers, and then you got to recognize that racism is built into all of us, that we all have pattern recognition systems inside of us. We're all designed to do this. You have to recognize that. You have to recognize that human populations exist. There are different populations of the human race that have existed in different parts of the planet, and that those existing in those places for tens of thousands of years has had evolutionary effects. Those effects are physical. They affect your entire body. Your entire genome is affected by your isolation as a human population. And so this one's more of a population-based understanding of the human race, but this is what I mean by understand ourselves. When I say understand ourselves, I mean us individually, collectively, at all scales, as a community, as a family, as a society, a whole population of the human race, countries. You know, I told you, this is about form and content, God and the devil, heaven and hell. This is about everything. This is about everything. Everything. It seems to me that the bottom layer, the layer underneath feminism, there must be a layer underneath it. I don't know what it is. I don't know how to describe it. I can't tell you feminism's the bottom layer, but it seems to me that this extends deeper and it goes up higher. It goes all the way to heaven and extends down to hell. We're talking about God and the devil here. We are. Somehow. I don't know how, but somehow. Okay, that's a lot of content. That is a lot of content. I want to make sure there's nothing else I want to say before I turn this camera off. It is December 21st, 2021. This is the first time I have fully articulated this thing. I didn't make any predictions, did I? I said TERFs are going to ahead of the curve. Really. Alright. I, of course, will end this with some video of my beautiful cat, Dusty. Hello, Dusty. Say hello to the camera. How you doing, buddy? He didn't want to cooperate for the camera. All right, I'm done. I'll see you later. Bye.